Welcome to Constant Variables, a podcast where we take a non-technical look at building and growing digital products. I'm Tim Bornholt. Let's get nerdy.
This episode is sponsored by the Jed Mahonis Group, the go-to tech team of the Upper Midwest. Visit jmg.mn to see some of our recent projects and to check out our pricing page, something you don't often see on service-based websites like ours. While you're listening to Tim's conversation with Kelvin Johnson, please take a second to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. That's after you've checked out our website, of course. If you help us out with a rating and review, we'll thank you with a shout out on the show. Visit constantvariables.co/review and we'll take you right there.
Hey, Kelvin, welcome to the show.
Tim, thanks for having me, brother.
I've been like a big fan of yours for the last few months, ever since we met back at Twin Cities Startup Week, and I'm really excited to have you on the show. I mean, we could spend a whole episode just talking about your background, but given you're the founder of a pitch software company, you probably have nailed your pitch at this point on your life story. So I would love to hear you give me that pitch. Like, how did you get to where you are today here?
How did I get to where I am today? Great question. So essentially, my quick trajectory, because I got to communicate with Brevity. I started off as a CPA at Ernst & Young. And both my mother and my father are both sales professionals. And they were like, what the hell are you doing being a CPA? You can't stop running your mouth. And they were right. So eventually made that next step to where I thought it was a good intersection of still being a nerd from the analytical side, but also a little bit more salesmanship. So I went into management consulting, at a top 20, management consulting firm focused on technology enablement and operational excellence for major financial institutions. From there, I was at a crossroads in my career because I started to get good at upselling work on consulting projects, but you don't get comped on that until you're associate director. So that was, as an impatient millennial, I didn't want to wait too long to potentially get paid, right? And then on the other side of consulting, what I didn't appreciate was I love the travel, but I didn't like the fact that you would give recommendations or proposals for something that could help fix a major problem at the company, and then it wouldn't get implemented more than half the time. So I didn't get the satisfaction of building a proposal and seeing that come to fruition. So I was at a crossroads of go to the dark side and become a sales professional solely, or do I go to a place where I can see my ideas come to fruition? So I chose the latter. I joined as an early employee of a SaaS company in Denver. And that's where the topic of our episode today comes into play about the acquisitions, right? So employee number 6, the way I got up here, they purchased 2 companies in the Twin Cities. So I led the due diligence, post-merger integration planning and execution. Eventually that was a success. I got promoted to run that business unit. And as I transitioned from that opportunity, that place gave me a really good foundation where I led sales, I led operations, I led product. I built the financial models that raised Series A capital, the M&A work. So from there, I started a freelance consulting shop called Humble Warrior Advisors, where I was helping early stage entrepreneurs get to that next major milestone. And within that cross-functional background of mine, it was really different for each client. But a large majority of the clients, I was helping them with their pitch, whether that was to customers or prospective investors. And during that time, I'm a self-proclaimed, as you know, book nerd. And the key inspirations for what I do now, there's 4 main books. There's Story Brand, there's Made to Stick, there's Why They Buy, and then 3-Minute Rule. So as I was doing consulting work, what I didn't appreciate about consulting is that from a business model perspective, it requires your time, and your time is not necessarily scalable. And I knew I didn't want to I knew I did not want to like start a consulting firm, but I do like the consulting skill set. So I was in the back of my mind, I was always like, how can I productize my insights in a scalable fashion? And then over time, through the influences of those four main books, I saw a gap in the market for when someone has an amazing idea, but has difficulty crafting a clear and persuasive narrative. I asked myself the question, what are those current software-based tools if someone can't necessarily afford a pitch coach, but someone doesn't have the time or patience to read all those four books I mentioned? And then that's where the concept of Brevity was really conceived. An on-demand, storytelling coach that helps you create a clear and persuasive narrative to better influence your target audience.
I love hearing those light bulb moments like that. It makes me so excited when it's like you feel the confluence of so many inputs that you just realize all of a sudden, like you see the gap in the marketplace and it's like, all right, we're going after this. So one area of your life and your expertise and kind of like what you mentioned too, we haven't really talked about this on the show before, but integration planning. I think that's a really fascinating topic, especially for people that may be listening to this show. So, before we go into Brevity, let's spend some time on that. And, you, like you mentioned, you kind of, in your previous life, you've stabilized a couple of companies that were acquired. You've integrated the staff and culture. You've retained the vast majority of the clients, and you've maintained key employees across those organizations. And Jenny's been kind of feeding me. Jenny's awesome. You heard her at the top of the show here. And if you don't know Jenny, you should get to know Jenny. She's awesome. But yeah,
she was absolutely awesome.
When you were chatting with her and even before, you had mentioned that doing this integration work took at least 2 years off of your life. You told me 5. So I'm assuming that this, doing this is worse than smoking is what I'm hearing. So I'm just really curious to hear, go down this path and kind of explore it a little bit. So first question around this is, how much planning was involved in your scenario that led to such success?
Yeah, so early on, when I joined that company in Denver, they had a core product, a corporate wellness solution, and over time, that CEO kept hearing from their clients, "We love your wellness software solution, but do you also offer HSAs? Do you offer FSAs, commuter benefits, COBRA?" So they thought it was going to be a complementary service offering in order to really expand the portfolio. And it was a good cross-selling opportunity, right? So when I first got to that company, I was tasked to build a new business unit from the ground up. And there's different ways to do it, right? So you can literally build everything from the ground up when it comes to software, people, customer success, the whole nine. You can license like the back end software of a solution. So I had to come up with what that plan was. But I think the holistic plan, because this industry required a lot of like knowledge, like it's not one of those ones you can just quickly get up to speed. It was always a part of the plan to acquire companies that have that subject matter expertise. So as we built the original core product and the early team, we got to a point where it was time to bring on subject matter expertise so we can actually successfully deliver our services to the early clients we sold. So once we built it, it was like the CEO was just like, all right, I have a few deals in the hopper. I'm close to 90% confident we can acquire these companies. And then at that point, I've heard a lot of stories around like just botched integrations, right? In whether people lose clients, whether people lose key employees. And, I pride myself with the concept of extreme ownership, right? And I did not want to be responsible, and I didn't have any experience, Tim, right? So they trusted me to figure it out. So the planning process was part tech, part people, part operations, but most importantly, knowing that the key risk in an integration is client retention and key employees, is really doing as much upfront homework prior to. So what's the nature of their client list? Knowing what the like doing a Pareto analysis on where are we most at risk within those two customer bases, and then making sure that we had a communications plan right when we get in there. Because it was one of those industries where the switching costs they're painful, but they're not too painful, right? So I leaned on one of my buddies, I'll give him a shout out, Bobby Toronto, who at the time was doing M&A work for Accenture. So he was I had maybe, 5 or 6 conversations really extracting best practices and pitfalls to avoid from him prior to building up, a post-merger integration plan with the founding team at that company. And what was cool about it was I built it. It was one of those organizations, Tim, and the same thing I want to have with Brevity is where people can flesh out ideas that they're passionate about, and then they can poke holes in it. I think there is a time and place where you need to collaborate from the bottom up, but they were like so busy that they were like, Kelvin, come up with a plan, get us together for a weekly session. So I think we started maybe 3 to 4 months prior to when we actually executed and signed off on the purchase agreement, to where we met weekly as a leadership team and poked holes in the plan before we started execution.
Man, that takes guts, like from the leadership standpoint, to just be like, hey, guy who's never done any mergers or acquisitions before, go figure out how to do this.
And that speaks volume to the culture at that company.
Oh yeah, that's what it's all about. Like, and that's the kind of culture I like fostering too. Is you got to hire smart people and then get out of their way. Like if you make the right hires up front, that can, it's not the end all be all. Obviously, like they got to do the work. But I mean, if you can get those soft skills and find those people that actually you can trust, and they'll figure it out and have those kind of traits that'll let them be vulnerable and humble to say where their limits are too, and be able to bring in help when it's needed. That's definitely a hard thing to master, but that's really what I've seen when it comes to successful companies. Like that's what it takes.
Yeah, and then you bring up a key word, humble, right? And having humility. I think what was really cool leading up to the actual acquisitions, what I appreciated about my consulting experience was the way feedback was given and received for most of the people I worked with, right? I've always been like a constant learner. And I like being in environments where people are vulnerable, but also diplomatic in how they give feedback. So when I first got to that company, I definitely made it known that I want to know what I'm doing well. I want to know what's missing, and I want to know what can be improved. And I think that's where that trust, going back to your earlier statement of like, how did they, why did they trust you to, if you have no experience, why did they trust you to be able to execute on it? For the first 12 months of that company, they also allowed me to give them upward feedback. So they were the type of bosses that actually appreciated it. So over time, trust was built pretty quickly because there was just a lot of execution being done both ways.
Oh, that's so important. Like I always like coming out of college, you know, I started my business right out of college and didn't have any experience in the corporate world or whatever the real world, whatever you want to call it. But it seemed like to me, it was a no brainer. Like if I'm going to have somebody working for me, like if I'm the owner and there's somebody working for me, like I want that person to tell me what I'm doing wrong. Like I'm trusting that person to elevate that work up. And it's so crazy, like been doing this for 10 years and you just kind of start to see, there's certain employee types where it's like that's the boss. Like you don't question the boss. You just do what you're told and you kind of go forward. And there's certain roles and times for that. But I would imagine like the kind of work that you're doing and the kind of work that we do with building custom software, it's like, I don't want to have somebody that's just pushing pixels or pushing paper or whatever you push in your various industries. I want somebody that's willing to say like, why are we pushing this paper? Why are we doing it this way? Like, can we change things and get on the same page and feel comfortable, like elevating it up so that you're kind of I can't remember what there's a phrase or a saying. It's slipping my mind right now, but it's like where you kind of coach up and coach your bosses and lead them in a way that's going to make the whole organization more effective.
Yeah, manage up. But Tim,
thank you.
Yeah, what I will tell you though, and this is the irony. I don't know about your experience. I haven't run like that dynamic I had with the CEO and COO, and even at certain professionals at the consulting firm. I would almost dare to say, as maybe both, a lot of people don't fit into that category.
Right. I would understand that. Like that was just me kind of being naive and new to the world. Like I said, like just kind of running my own thing and not having any of that experience. I just kind of took that for granted. Like that's the leadership style that I would thrive best under is like, everyone's doing their role, but willing to help and coach each other. But, empathy is a super hard skill to have. And sometimes giving that feedback is really, really difficult to do in a way that is getting the message across, but not being mean or belittling or anything like that.
Yeah. And then that as I think about the lessons learned, I'm a big fan of I think there are some ways to uncover if people are open to giving and receiving feedback from a behavioral perspective that we can dive into a little bit later, because I think you can find out a little early on what capacity people have to give and receive feedback.
Oh, absolutely. I think one thing I want to touch on is, again, we kind of teased it with you saying that these integrations took multiple years off of your life. And I'm sure that, there's good reason for that. I'm wondering if there's any lessons or key things like that stick with you of what not to do, or just lessons that you can share of what not to do when doing these kinds of mergers.
The biggest thing is giving people titles based off of paper experience without vetting and verifying is the number one. I think we probably changed the org chart with the two, because we integrated the two into one business unit. We probably changed that org chart a little bit too much. And I think that we could have potentially been a bit more, what was the concept? Slow down to move fast.
Yeah.
Right. And not giving, like, first and foremost, getting role clarity on there's a concept that my buddy and Allied Executives, the executive business coaching group I'm in, his name's Brendan. He always says you got to separate the role from the soul. Right. And having some real clarity of what that role is. Obviously, what are the, deliverables or execution or what skills are needed, but skills are one piece of the puzzle. I'm a Villanova Wildcat, right? And Jay Wright always brings up attitude, and that's a part of their core values. So how are you vetting skills? How are you vetting core values before you just give out a title based off of years of experience? Because even in the pitch, right, when people are pitching their businesses, and I see a lot of time in the one of our sections, the last section of our pitch framework is list capabilities and needs. And you're thinking about capabilities. A lot of people bring up, I got 25 years of work experience in this sector. Well, that's not telling you if it was 25 crappy years or 25 stellar years. Like, what does years actually mean to your like actual capability and your proven track record? In my opinion, it means nothing, right? So getting more nuanced about what were those key success metrics? Did you even have key success metrics, right? What you come to find out, certain people at organizations don't know what even success looks like.
Going down that path a little bit too of like how you actually go about vetting people out. I think one key thing right there you just identified is when people just say, well, I've been sitting in a chair for 25 years. Doesn't that count for something? And I guess it could. If you're individually, personally fulfilled living that kind of a lifestyle, great. Like then, yeah, that's successful. But if you're going out and trying to convince someone to give you $1 million to do your thing, you got to prove a little more than that. I would imagine. Are there other like things that you see as like when you're going through and vetting people out? Are there other like kind of things that pop up in your mind right away of like maybe this person shouldn't be sitting in the CTO role or whatever it is?
Yeah. So what I'm a big fan of, I'm a book nerd, right? So there's a book called Who, the Who hiring method. And they have a pretty good methodology of increasing the probability of it being a good fit. It's not bulletproof, right? Because we all have certain biases that we bring to the table when you're vetting talent. But I think the big thing, red flag, is when people can't get specific and concrete with certain questions, right? They have to be able to paint that picture that, again, based off of what area you're trying to vet, you're walking away with certainty and clarity, like, oh, that story makes sense. So, for example, if you're within the last year of your role, could you explain when did you have like a disagreement with a peer, and how did you handle that, right? Or just trying to get more specific. But like when I see people get very general and not willing to be vulnerable, and you give them multiple chances, it just comes off as a huge red flag to me.
That's good to take away. I know you said you had a list that you kind of did some brainstorming. Are there other lessons or things that you've thought of what not to do when merging companies?
Yeah, thank you for reminding me. Let's see, giving people titles without vetting and verifying. And this is a small one, but like planning group, sometimes even in a startup culture, sometimes people don't get buy-in on what matters most to the larger, like to the aggregate group of people you're working with. You can't please everybody, right? But like, can you find out an aggregate pulse of what are their personal motivations or activities? So like a small one is like planning group activities without their buy-in. So going to what are those escape rooms, right? Like this would be a great team activity. Let's just go to an escape room. Like, but without vetting that's something they even want to do.
Yeah. That's, I feel like I've been guilty of that too, where I'm like, it'd be really fun to have like our company holiday party at a brewery, and like I'm one of, maybe like 25% of our team actually likes craft beer. The rest of the team wants to drink something else or not drink. And I'm certainly guilty of that. So I feel seen.
It comes back to making assumptions, because sometimes when, I'm an East Coast guy, kind of moving at a fast pace. I have a bias towards action, and it's good at times, and then at other times it's problematic. So it's having that patience, or having someone on your team where you lack that patience to be like, slow down there, cowboy. Right? We need to do. You're skipping some steps here, right? So if you can't do it, make sure you have someone who can hold you accountable to doing that. And then the last one I had was really around humility. I'm not perfect. I think that, I think I was 27 or 28 years old, but making sure you're having humility, consistent humility, especially if you're dealing with professionals that have actually been in the industry longer than you have, right? And not letting your title or promotion, cloud your ego, and be willing to get that buy-in.
That's a really interesting point, because I think that there's I've been in situations certainly where I feel I walk into a room of people that I haven't met before, and everyone's kind of trying to gauge everyone else's skill sets, everyone's capabilities, and you after spending a little bit of time, you kind of suss out like, well, I don't know, maybe I do know what I'm doing here and I can speak up and talk over this person. But at the beginning, if I were to just walk in and start throwing around all my knowledge and kind of over dominating the conversation, I think that that sets up the relationship for disaster, where if you do walk into a situation where you're meeting new people and integrating with a new team, you don't want to just immediately assume everything they've been doing for the last several years is dumb and stupid and wrong. Maybe take some time to learn why things are the way they are and figure out how you can, help improve the process, like learn the process and then improve it, as opposed to just coming in and kind of torpedoing the whole thing.
Yeah. Don't come in hot. You can't. I'll tell you the biggest mistake I made. This is what you definitely don't want to do, right? So this is, I was so bad. And you got to understand, my background was mostly like finance, ops, product, then sales, right? I kind of landed in the sales on the back end of my career. So I made a lot of mistakes in the early sales days. And I'll give you an example. So part of the high level strategy and what we thought was going to be successful with these integrations was the cross-selling opportunities. So early on, that was a big emphasis, right? So within our communications plan, the main goal was to reassure those clients that service levels won't go down, right? Within that same conversation, they were becoming aware of what this expanded portfolio looks like. So on one of the first conversations, I started going into heavy sales mode when they brought up like, oh, that's interesting. And then I started going into, well, do you guys have the budget for it? Do you blah, 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 blah? Like, it was like the very first time meeting this individual with the point of contacts with the clients, with the companies we purchased. And it was just so pushy, slow down to move fast, react to the questions, answer the questions that they're asking. Don't jump the gun, right? And that definitely was one of my worst sales conversations, because it wasn't even meant to be a sales conversation. It was meant to be, how are we going to maintain the great service levels with that company?
One area that, since this is a technology show, I guess we could probably talk about tech a little bit. Is there value in thinking through how tech or like your team is going to integrate from a technical standpoint through whatever software they're using ahead of time, even if like it's not your goal in the immediate future to go after tech? Like how do you think about incorporating tech when you're thinking about these mergers and acquisitions?
That's a great question. So this is the funny part about it. When we purchased the two, we actually had to migrate the one into the other office within 27 days. I can't get into why,
Oof.
but we had to think about tech right away. So we had to migrate telephone systems. We had to get people on Teams. We had to convert the one cloud instance to another. So my
27 days? Holy
in
cow.
27 days. So an office move, telephone systems, and I'm sure I'm leaving things out because it was a long time, but we absolutely had to account for that a lot sooner than anticipated.
Oof, man. So that's probably not something you would advise normally, though. Like you might want to have maybe a little bit more time to think through how you would do that, or do you think like the baptism by fire thing was a better approach?
We had no choice. I don't think it's a better approach.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought.
Yeah, you got what was it? Walk, crawl, walk, run. You got to do that, especially with tech.
Yeah, I would imagine merging teams together. Like if one company is like in the Microsoft stack and one company is more of like, we're going to use Slack and G Suite or whatever. Yeah, that's. I mean, on the one hand, you do want to plan this out and not make like hasty decisions one way or the other. But on the other hand, it's like, it's never fun to transition to another stack. And it's certainly not fun to migrate your cloud infrastructure from one provider to another. Like that, all of that stuff is a nightmare and such a risk, so many risks. Like I would imagine like when you say that you had like 2 to 5 years taken off of your life, and when I'm thinking about it, like that, those 27 days must have lasted like 2 years of just like how much stress you underwent.
Yeah. And so luckily it was me and the CTO who moved from Denver to up here. So we were in corporate housing. And I still was managing the ops team in Denver while doing this migration. So we drove up 14 hours from Denver to Minneapolis. We had corporate housing. I was doing 3 weeks Minneapolis, 1 week Denver to make sure I didn't lose touch with my ops team. But luckily, our CTO just was full force, right? And he mapped it out well, the different phases from the telephone systems to the communications systems to the cloud, and where we worked well together. And I joke around in my current job is I'm not a CEO, I'm a CFO, meaning a chief follow-up officer. So if that CTO needed to have a conversation with multiple parties to transfer certain things and people weren't being responsive, I was kind of the pit bull to make sure those conversations happened at the right time so we could, not have any delays in that migration.
That's great. I think there've been so many lessons shared on this already that there's been just tremendous value already, but I want to move on and talk about Brevity a little bit because how ironic to talk about Brevity a little bit. That was a poor choice of words. But I really do want to get some time to talk through this. So, Brevity, we've been talking quite a bit over the last few months about it, but I would love for you to give the audience here like your 30-second pitch on what Brevity is, just so we kind of have a level set of what you're trying to do in the market here.
Yeah, I'm going to pitch it a little different this time. I'm going to lead with this. There's a quote, when you confuse, you lose. Essentially, that is our value proposition in a nutshell. When you have an amazing idea and you lack the clarity or the concision to explain it in a way to get people eager to want to learn more, we have the platform for that. So whether that's a 30-second or 60-second elevator pitch or a 5-minute sales or fundraise pitch, or even internal communications, and you need that idea that you're so passionate about to land with your audience, Brevity is the place to build a persuasive narrative to get your audience to first understand, but to then be engaged to want to learn more.
I love it. I know that part of your drive with this is to incorporate AI into the software. And I'm curious to hear why AI is such a big buzzword right now. Like the only thing that would probably irritate me more is if you said you were doing crypto or something like that. But, but I wonder, like with AI specifically, like why is AI the right tool for the problem you're trying to solve here?
Yeah, so AI is a piece. So Brevity is really a workflow tool. The AI is one piece of the puzzle. So the reason that AI is important is when you have a large data set of unsuccessful and successful pitches from a linguistics perspective, you can start to analyze trends and patterns that you can make it easier and more efficient and effective for people that may be getting writer's block, for example. So that's why the AI is an important piece of the puzzle for Brevity.
I like that. Yeah, it seems like to me, the AI part of it is actually useful. Like I was being facetious about crypto, but I do really see the value of using AI in this because it from what I understand, like you're really trying to help people communicate better and tell their story in a way that is in a nice package that's easy to follow. And like you were saying before of like, if it's unclear, people aren't going to follow it. And a lot of times when you're telling stories, if you can follow a template of like a story style that people are comfortable with and understand intuitively, and you can mesh your story into that style, you're going to automatically put yourself ahead of so many people. You still have to do little things to make your story compelling, and it actually has to be a good story. Like that's kind of table stakes with this, but I there's so much value in what you're doing. I'm really, I guess there's no question out of this other than I'm just really excited for what you're working on.
No, I appreciate that. And other thing, Tim, is think about the challenges with just communication outside of Brevity for a second. We're living in a society where we have very short attention spans.
Yeah.
We're living in a society just like there's scientific evidence that comprehension, even when you are clear and compelling, comprehension rates are low after the first time hearing something, right? So when you take in clarity, which is hard, it's hard to communicate with clarity, but it's also hard to communicate with clarity under time constraints. And that's where our product is really amazing. And even in current state, where if you think of a pitch competition, what pitch competitions and demo days all have in common is that you have to communicate value under a time constraint. So the way our product works is one of the first steps is to select your pitch goal, your audience, and your duration. So when you select that duration, we calculate and recommend the number of statements embedded into this framework we called SOUL, the number of statements and slides to make sure that you're hitting those key themes your audience must know in the right order.
Yeah, I think that's tremendous. I mean, there are so many people that are just talking these days, and it's so easy to talk, but it's so easy. It's so hard to actually convey what you want to say in a way that people will retain it. And that's me speaking as I'm sitting here like listening to you, and I'm standing in my bedroom and I'm looking at all the posters around the walls, and it's like it just takes like everyone's attention is so fractured these days. Like it is super important to have that clear, concise way of communicating. One question I had around this is I know you're going out and doing some fundraising. Like, how are you funding Brevity? Is it mostly all like funded from external sources? Do you have like a honeypot you've been sitting on? Like, how are you going about getting this thing built?
Yeah, I like that question. So it's three ways, right? The jobs I worked at previously allowed me to take this risk. So I want to give a shout out to those former employers that allowed me to have not a large safety net, but a nice cushion to take this risk. The fundraising early on, I asked myself the question, who have I impacted personally or professionally that also has a good living, right? And what we found, we raised the friends and family round last year. I don't like the word friends and family because I feel like that's, maybe pre-seed is a better or early stage because it's it makes it seem like it's easy to raise that amount, you know?
It feels like you're getting the like my sister used to work at Old Navy, and they always used to get the friends and family discount, and that's what it feels like to me. Is like you're working retail and getting 15% off. Like it doesn't scream like you know. It like you said, it's not easy to do that still. Like not everybody has friends and family that are willing to throw you tens of thousands of dollars at a single pop.
No. But what was fascinating by doing that exercise is there's more people, even founders I help now, and I tell them the story I'm telling you, like the previous jobs you worked for. If we look back at our main sources of capital at Brevity, the largest came from the executive business coaching group I'm in called Allied Executives, right? The second largest source of capital came from my professors and peers at Villanova University. The third area, which is super fascinating, was the parents of the kids I coached in football, track, and basketball during my grad school program.
Oh, nice. Yeah, it's crazy. Like if you get out there and you seem like the kind of person, like you said, you don't sit still, you're active and you're action oriented. So having all of those past influences in your life and having all those connections is really like, it's striking to me how many people come to me with ideas for apps. And when you ask about funding and fundraising, it's just like, oh, I'll go find money somehow. And it's like, is it really that easy? Like I feel like everyone assumes that you can just go somewhere and someone is going to just drop, $100,000 or $1 million or whatever in your lap. And, you really do have to be putting in build those relationships, build that trust with people and get, have that sort of equity that you've built up that you can cash in on, the social equity that you can turn into actual equity to get your idea off the ground.
Yeah, it's huge, especially the idea off the ground stage. Now, so we raised our goal was 200, we raised 262. And some of that also came, shout out to Minnesota Launch Innovation Award. Some of it was like non-dilutive grants. So that was the other part of that 262. But as we progress to where we are now, the biggest key success metric with our minimum viable product last year was we helped founders raise over 1.6 million in capital within our first year. We kind of validated that what we're doing, it helps, it works. I'm not saying it's the ultimate solution, but we're making strides in the right direction. Now, this is the unlock, an epiphany I had that I didn't do early on. And one of our investors and advisors is a Shark Tank winner. And it's really being my favorite sales equation, Tim, or fundraising equation is results equals right fit prospect times quality interaction times quantity, right? And if working backwards, quantity is just a numbers game, right? Quality interaction, that is having a clear, succinct, and compelling pitch. But if we go to this left side of right fit prospect, this is where my biggest lessons learned is if I'm pitching Brevity, which is a communications software company, to a fintech investor, it doesn't matter how great my pitch is. We don't fit their investment criteria or their investment thesis. So taking a step back, I've really drilled down what are those 7 criteria points of what's considered a right fit prospect, whether that's demographic or psychographic, industry related, business stage. Even in the industry now, some people may say early stage on their website, but how do they define early stage? Do they define it as product market fit? Do they define it as, 15K in monthly recurring revenue? Do they define it as you have 3 enterprise logos? So getting very granular in what you are and aligned with a potential prospect, it takes a lot of time to do it, but you end up having more better conversations because these are people that can, I strongly believe that the success of your go-to-market strategy is honestly based on if you're going B2B, the quality of your relationships, right? So getting super granular and nuanced about what is the right fit prospect and then building your target list from that.
That's huge advice. One last question around this whole thing. Like I know you've helped other startups acquire funding. Obviously, you just mentioned that. Have you seen, and especially now you're doing this fundraising in the midst of, we can all blame the pandemic for everything and will continue to blame it probably for the rest of our lives. But I'm really curious to hear how fundraising has changed, or if anything has changed as a result of fundraising through COVID. Or I even wonder, like, has the Great Resignation really caused any issues with the fundraising side of things?
Yeah. So to answer your question, fundraising and COVID, there's two different questions. You're talking about the Great Resignation, and then you're talking about the just COVID in general. With COVID, a lot of my investors, I'll be honest with you, I've never met in person.
Which is
no,
awesome.
I'm just sharing my experience. That's not, but what I also have heard in the startup community is actually easier to get appointments because investors and entrepreneurs are traveling less.
Yeah. That's how I figured it'd be a positive impact in many ways. I mean, it's with fundraising, we've been talking about how interpersonal it is and how you need to establish good quality connections. But it's, while Zoom is not an ideal way to make those high quality connections, it's at least a more effective way of increasing the quantity number. And you can, get multiple meetings on the calendar without having to fly to the coasts or having to, even drive downtown or something. If you want to just do it right from your office in your house, go for it.
Yeah, and so I don't think there's been any dramatic impacts. I would say the Great Resignation, if part of your fundraising strategy is team oriented and you had team members like churn, then that could be potentially problematic, right? With the Great Resignation, but just COVID overall, I think it's an opportunity. Again, if you have that great target list, you can get appointments because you align. There's like just, even with the cold, I've even had meetings from cold emails because it's so clear that we need to have a conversation and this is why.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm blown away by you, Kelvin. Like, I'm so glad you came on the show today and helped share some of this knowledge that you've picked up over the years. Where can people find you online and learn more about Brevity?
It's brevitypitch.com. And also I've said on other podcasts, I'm not the most active on social, but our LinkedIn is probably the best place. Brevity Pitch on LinkedIn.
That's because you're out doing stuff. You don't got time for social media.
Right?
I love it, dude. Thank you so much for joining me today. This was an awesome conversation.
Oh, same here. Thanks for having me. It's also just good reflection. And there's some lessons there that I need to implement in current day. So this was great.
Thanks to Kelvin Johnson for joining Tim on the podcast today. You can learn more about Brevity by visiting brevity.one. Show notes for this episode can be found at constantvariables.co. You can get in touch with the show by emailing hello@constantvariables.co, or you can find us on Twitter at CV_podcast. Today's episode was produced by Jenny Karkowski and edited by the elegant Jordan Doust. As I mentioned at the start of the episode, if you can take 2 minutes to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, we'll give you a mention in a future episode as a thank you. Visit constantvariables.co/review and we'll link you right there. This episode was brought to you by the Jed Mahonis Group. Check us out at jmg.mn and sign up for our monthly newsletter at jmg.mn/news.